All right, let me get my notes up real quick. So hold on one second. Let's talk. All right, so this is a continuation on the conversation that I was having with Better World Peace. And I think Camper, I think it's Guap as well too. We were talking about fair value gaps, specifically structure breaking fair value gaps. So a couple of things that I've learned from the videos that I've been watching with ICT is that one, fair value gaps that break structure should hold, or all fair value gaps under or above it will fail. And so essentially what that means is that if that structure break and fair value gap fails, then price is going to seek out liquidity on the other side. Basically, probably the most previous swing low or swing high, depending on what's happening, right? So what we're looking for in this example is if we want this fair value gap when it breaks structure, if we want, how can I put it? If we want to anticipate that price is still moving in the same exact trend, then what we're looking for is for that structure breaking fair value gap to hold. All right. In other words, when I say hold, I'm saying we're looking for price to displace away from that fair value gap, and then also to create more fair value gaps if it wants to maintain trend, right? So for example, we have that example here actually, where we do get a structure break in fair value gap, right? Before that point, we're at a downtrend, right? So we do get a structure break in fair value gap here. Why? Because we broke this previous high, right? For strat terms, that's a TTO back to the upside, right? So when that happens, when you get that structure, that break of structure, excuse me, what you should be targeting is, what you should be looking for is for price to displace away from that fair value gap. And essentially that's what we get, right? Price displaces away, creating the fair value gap, and then the next candle displaces away, right? We don't get too much of displacement here, obviously, because the body closed with inside of the previous candle, but obviously that's not a reversal, right? So even with this pullback, we create another structure break in fair value gap. It gets tested, but again, respected, right? Stays above, creating a bullish order block, and it continues to go. And we keep breaking structure with every single retracement. We keep breaking structure to the upside. We have not, in this whole run, we haven't broken structure to the downside. That would be a market structure shift, right? So this tells you that even on these retracements, that the market is still bullish on this particular ticker, in this case, the Qs, right? So that's what I'm talking about, how if you get a structure break in fair value gap, we're expecting it price to displace away and continue trend. Also, we are also expecting or anticipating um, that price is going to create more fair value gaps, right? If you get a structure break in fair value gap, then you're looking for more fair value gaps to be created. So for example, we get a fair value gap here, right? After we break structure, not quite there. Actually, we don't have another one, except for the structure break and fair value gaps, of course. Yeah, I don't see, let me just double check. Yeah, but either way, right, this structure break in fair value gap creates a fair value gap above it. It also creates another one, right? So we're talking 1, 2, 3, right, as we continue going. So that tells you that price is still holding. It's still respecting the fair value gap, and any pullback into the fair value gap was just rebalancing. Honestly, you kind of have to think about like the market, and feel free to test this theory out. But um, the one thing that you notice when it comes to the fair value gaps is that the market is only doing one or two things, regardless of whether it is bullish or if it is bearish. It is either seeking out a fair value gap for rebalancing, right, before continuing higher, or it is seeking liquidity on the other side. So, like for example, we have an example here with that. Here we have SPY on the 15-minute, right? So right? I've marked out liquidity above that swing high up there. Um, And so we have a structure break in fair value gap here, just illustrated there, right? So technically, right, we're on a downtrend, right? There's no if, ands, or buts about it. We're on a downtrend, actually probably closing out this gap here. All right, let's see what happens next. So if we're expecting price to continue, right, what are we looking for? We are looking for more fair value gaps to be created, as well as we are looking for price to displace above the previous candle, right? Above the higher or the low of the previous candle. In this case, the low of the previous candle. So let's see what happens next. All right, let's go next. Okay, so stop there for a second, right? So we created the fair value gap, but as you can see, we didn't get the displacement that we're looking for to take out this low, right? So we get the one, and then actually we end up with a two up right there, right? So for me, obviously not a good entry point right here, right? So we get the two up to come back and retest the fair value gap. It's being respected, right? Because we wicked off of it, and then we get the 2-2 reversal. Now what we're looking for is either a structure breaking fair value gap for price to displace, if we're expecting it to continue to the downside, or just actually, sorry, rewind. What we're looking for is for the next candle to displace below this low for trend to continue, and then potentially turn into a possible fair value gap. But that doesn't happen, right? So what we end up with is we come back to test the structure breaking fair value gap here. Right below it, we actually created a structure breaking fair value gap, breaking this high over here. Now let's see if we can get displacement above this candle, seeing if we can create, more fair value gaps. Nope. Oh, there we go, right? So far, right? What have we done? We've created a structure breaking fair value gap. We're continuing up in trend, but notice we have not created another fair value gap just yet, right? This candle barely couldn't displace above the two up. I believe this two up, actually, yeah, just barely displaced above the three. And then we finally get displacement with this two up here, right? So let's continue on and see what happens. All right, so here, all right, there we go. So now what we have is this fair value gap, the structure breaking fair value gap has now been invalidated, right? We got displacement above it, right? Now, probably your next question is going to be like, hey, so when would I enter into that, right? What's my trade entry, right? So obviously, you don't want to enter right here just yet. What I would, if it were me, what I would look for now that we see that the fair value gap has not been respected, right? This fair value gap is being respected, but it's not being respected. So what we're looking for is price to head towards liquidity above here, right? So we broke it down here. Strat wise, you probably could have entered down here, just keeping it a stack, right? But you would have had to have been patient throughout this entire process. But even strat wise, it gives you, okay, no, you don't have to exit this just yet. But anyway, um, so what I would do is honestly, I would wait for price to maybe come back and retest this fair value gap and then bounce off of it, making it what's the word I'm looking for? An inversion fair value gap, right? Because the fair value gets created, right? Then price comes back up and it validates the same fair value gap. Now that fair value gap, instead of being resistance like we thought it would be, it is now support, right? That's what we're looking for. We're looking for that support now for it to come back and then go ahead and seek out liquidity, right? So let's see what happens. Okay, so now what have we done? We've created another structure breaking fair value gap, displacing out of the structure breaking, of the bearish fair value gap that broke structure over here, the invalidated one. So We actually probably did not get a good entry. Let's see, does it come back? We hit, come back. Got it. All right, so strat wise, you could have entered here and then monitored the entire trade, right? And then just let it run up, right? Or honestly, you could even have taken this 2-2 up. Yes, it would have been a long time of being patient, but what was the first rule, right? When you get a break of structure, what you're expecting is more fair value gaps to be created. And if it's a level, if it's a good break of, excuse me, if it's a good fair value gap that broke structure, then we're expecting price to trade away from it, to displace away from it. And what did price do here, right? Even after the consolidation, it still displaced away from it, right? So we're seeing it move away from it. And also it did create another fair value gap as well too, right? In here as well, right? But I digress back to the original reason why I pointed this out is that when we had, I'm sorry. Nope, I'll keep that one. So when we had this fair value gap that broke structure to the downside, when we came back to invalidate it, right? What happens when that fair value gap doesn't hold? Then price is seeking out liquidity, right? If you see a fair value gap, a structure break in fair value gap that does not hold like how it didn't here, right? Came straight through it, no issues there, right? No resistance or anything like that. Now we are expecting or seeking out where liquidity is, and that's probably going to be the target of where price hits. Now, obviously, don't know the specific amount of time that that will take, but there we go. There we go. Right. So then it will come out and seek liquidity, right? So in this situation, if this was like, a scalp or whatever, if you had entered down here at 511, um, probably targeting the 515 calls, then yeah, you would have put it pretty, would have been pretty nice. Even still, like even if you would have entered here from 514 up to potentially, well, not 515, obviously you probably go a little bit higher. Or if you, I mean, if yeah, you could use that as a, because it eventually gets all the way up to 516. So yeah, you could even target that as well too, maybe as a scalp or a day trade or something like that, and see it keep going. And as a matter of fact, if we continue this out, right? So what do we do after we get the reversal? We created another fair value gap here. All right, let's see what price does. Price continues to displace away from it, right? Creating another fair value gap. And there. All right. And again, we're just expecting it, um, you know, we're expecting it to continue to displace away from it if it's a good level, just to continue to displace away from it. So at this point in the trade, you're up to about 516 and change. There we go. So we finally get a, not quite because we couldn't displace. There we go. So we finally get, okay, there we go. We finally get a displacement right below the low. Obviously, it's not a fair value gap, but that's where you get your change in your market structure shift. Actually, I'm sorry, you get the market structure shift over here, right? This candle, it displaced below this low, right? So that's where you get the shift. And at that point, I mean, you could have chosen to exit the trade or gotten out at the highs up here at again the 516 and change. So two ways that trade could have gone. Both would have been successful. This one probably would have been monster. That 2-2 reversal. back to the upside, right? But obviously from a actually, yeah, that 2-2 reversal back to the upside. And from an ICT standpoint, you've seen that it breaks structure. So then I would just look for price. If I'm already in the trade, I would just look for price to respect that fair value gap that it created down here and, continue on, which it does, right? So strat wise, it doesn't really give you a reason to exit this trade up until about here, right? Because strat says when you get that reversal, that's when you exit. But ICT would tell you, no, you can stay in this because the fair value gap, right, has not been invalidated yet, right? So it's still respecting that fair value gap. Um, and again, what's the two things that market does, whether it's bullish or bearish? It's either seeking a fair value gap to rebalance, seeking it to rebalance before making the next move up, or it is seeking liquidity on the other side, right? Once we break structure back to the downside. So then we're seeking liquidity on the other side, right? So let's clear all this out real quick. So like here, for example, right? Actually, no, because we don't get a structure break in fair value gap. See if I can find an example like that. Okay, hold up. Um, I mean, even though it's not a structure breaking fair value gap, you can even see it here, right? This is a bearish fair value gap, right? And as you can see, price does not respect it. And it, again, breaks right through it. It actually turns into an inversion fair value gap because what price does, creates it, invalidates it, gets up here, and then comes back to retest it down here with this 3 before wicking off of that and pushing up higher. So yeah, even though it's not a bearish, a structure break in fair value gap, it still does push up higher. And then we get it does get invalidated. And then we get the reversal back to the upside, right? So when that happens, again, seeking out liquidity. So at that point in time, it's either the most previous high that you're going for, but in this case, because we know how SPY moves, I probably would have targeted that swing high right there. Where is it? That swing high right there. So probably would have targeted that swing high right there. And yeah, price comes back, retest, and then displaces away from it. So as a matter of fact, and then yeah, this structure break in fair value gap creates another fair value gap. No, oh yeah, and then yeah, so then yeah, you get another one as well too. So, and then so that goes back to again one of the principles of a a good fair value gap, creates more fair value gaps, and so it continued to do that. Anyway, I hope that helps. I hope it makes sense. If there's any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to ask.